This is the 25th of May 2023, and I'm glad that you're joining us this morning here on Morning Prime. So Connie, that comes in handy for you every Thursday, where we take a critical analysis of the state of the economy. We're doggedly following, of course, the recent authority that has been given, or directive, I should say, from the president regarding the housing levy. And we'll be discussing that, how it really portends for you and your pocket. We shall be delving deeper, looking even at the breakdown, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as some dailies have put it this morning. Also, we will delve deeper on the Turkana oil project right now that we have tackled, that is taking the whole project solely. And we shall be looking as well at the state of inflation right now and how it's affecting different facets of the economy. Manufacturers are warning Kenya is losing and is at risk of losing 130 billion shillings investment if finance bill is passed. But it seems that is no point of discussion right now, according to the suggestions that we can see from parliamentarians, especially who are leaning on the other side of Kenya Kwanza. So what does it really portend for you and for me, the common mwananchi? I'm holding court this morning with Professor Gituro Wanaina, who is a lecturer at the School of Business, University of Nairobi. Also, we do have the chair of KEPSA Foundation. This is Engineer Patrick Obath. We'll be joined by the director of School of Accountancy, Strathmore University. This is Dr. Jim McPhee, and we'll be joined as well by Bill Okero, who is a businessman and also a politician. So let's put this horse into a full run, but I'll be remiss if I don't hear from Patrick Obath and also Professor Gituro Wanaina. Professor, good morning. Good to see you.
Morning. Good to see you also here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been a while, and I know now you really have a lot.
You also took a sabbatical or something.
And just a short break.
I did the same.
To just,
rewind.
Recalibrate.
Absolutely.
And get your true north as well.
And prepare for all this taxation,
Taxation, yeah.
You have to prepare yourself for it.
Yes.
As we hit the next financial year.
The next financial year. Well, David is warning that we should brace up. That things are not going to be better for the next 3 years. Yeah. So we should be bracing up for hard times ahead. Absolutely. This is what the principal cabinet secretary, Musalia Mudavadi, has been warning. Right, Patrick? Good morning. Good to see you.
Morning.
Yes.
Morning.
Latest from you?
Hey. Still farming.
Still doing avocados.
I know this is the season now for avocado.
Excuse me. Mine is still young. It's been on the ground for just a year. Right, so it's coming up, and it's one of those things you see. You see things growing.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
It's a great thing to sort of get into that space. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But obviously, people say don't be a telephone farmer. You have to be hands-on. So, but technology still helps.
It does.
Technology helps, and you can actually embrace technology to help you farm.
Exactly.
Not necessarily remotely, but semi-remotely.
Semi-remotely.
So
you can actually get a Zoom or a drone just going through the farm.
You can go through. You can go that far. But all I've done is I've given my farm supervisor a smart camera, a smartphone. With the features that I want. So on a weekly basis, he gives me visuals, right? And if there's anything wrong that is there,
pick it up.
He's able to pick it up, and then I've got technical advisors who are available all over the place. So I've got an agronomist, I've got all these people. So if he sees something wrong with the plant, he just takes a photograph, sends it to my agronomist, whom I've got on a retainer. And he's able to advise, So we've seen a few plant diseases coming here and there. And within no time, bang, he advises, and then we are able to take care of it. So I think telephone farming wasn't quite right, but technology farming, I think, is probably tenable.
Agritech. All right, let's see what is fresh off the press this morning. We begin with the bold paper. This is the Standard. How China hacked NIS and the presidency. The Dragon attack, it says here on the sub-headline, in a nearly 4-year-long secret cyber campaign, Chinese spies illegally attack and access sensitive information from key ministries and state institutions, including the Office of the President, Treasury, and NIS, as Beijing seeks information on debt. This is according to a Reuters investigation revealing that. And this is tucked away on page 4 of the Standard this morning. These are the targeted institutions that have been listed here: Office of the President, the Treasury, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Intelligence Service, that is NIS, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Information, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Lands, Interior Ministry, and Counter-Terrorism Center. The said false report is groundless, far-fetched, and sheer nonsense. Any attempt to sow discord between China and Kenya is doomed to failure. This is what the China Embassy spokesperson said regarding the Dragon attack there. That story, you can follow it on page 4 of the Standard this morning. Corruption, you are on your own. This is what President is warning the CSs. You are on your own, CSs warned. This is in regard to corruption and the dark side of the South Rift T-Wars. Well, this is technology threatening labors in Kericho and Bomet, and we saw them banning the T-Plackers machines there. Looking on top there, we have the teaser. Talks Azimio issues 6-day ultimatum, the housing levy. Also, Ruto men's case. You can read all they have to say on page 7 of the Standard today. Remember, also shipping and logistics. Pullard magazine comes in handy for you every Thursday. Real estate as well comes in handy for you every Thursday. And we have a full story there, or analysis of Vinicius Jr. and racism in football. And you can read all about it on page 47 of the Standard this morning. The Daily Nation is on housing, Ruto housing plan, good, bad, and ugly. The good and the bad is all listed for you to see. And we can begin with the good, that real estate developers to get free land tax incentives on construction inputs and guaranteed market. Also, banks assured of repayment of money they lend to developers under the program with interest. SMEs that supply construction inputs such as doors and windows get new market. Beneficiaries to get houses at low interest rates. You can withdraw your money after 7 years if you do not get or want a house. And the bad is here. Workers' basic pay to be deducted, I should say, at 3% monthly, thus reduced take home. Also, employers to contribute 3% to respective employees' accounts, thus more payroll cost. Beneficiaries to lose house and be thrown out if they fail to honor long-term payment plans. And the employees allowed to withdraw their contribution and not the employers after 7 years. Government to spend 36 billion shillings annually on the fund on behalf of civil servants. That is the bad. The President Ruto is on a marketing bleeds to win over Kenyans opposed to his housing program, which is shaping up as one of his legacy projects in his first term. But proposal to forcibly tax workers and employers has drawn sharp protest, even as questions abound over its urgency and practicality. This story is on page 6, 7, and 8 of the Daily Nation this morning. And the flag reads here: controversy, real estate developers biggest winners as workers and employers to feel a pinch. Still on the front page of the Daily Nation, Azimio issues 6-day ultimatum over talks. The Raila Odinga-led Azimio La Umoja One Kenya coalition yesterday gave a 6-day ultimatum to President William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza to address concerns raised by the bipartisan team, including cessation of Jubilee Party invasion. Else, they will deem the talks to have collapsed and resort to other actions. This story continues on page 4 of the Daily Nation this morning. Manufacturers are warning Kenya risks losing 130 billion shillings investments if finance bill is passed. And this is on page 12 of the Daily Nation. And we'll run you by that particular story also in the course of the program. Raila's hidden hand in Oduola ouster bid. ODM chief unhappy with fights at home. You could follow the story on page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. On education, Machogu appoints new councils for varsities. For 14 varsities, Education Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Machogu has appointed councils for universities that were operating without the top governance organs. This is on the back page of the Daily Nation this morning. And foreign currency deposits cross record 1 trillion shillings mark. Excuse me, that is a 1 trillion shillings mark. Wealthy Kenyans and businesses seek a haven for their fortunes amid relentless sharp fall in the shilling. And the border granny of Kisii also is featured today in the Daily Nation. You can follow that story inside the Daily Nation. Let's see what we have on the front page of the People Daily. Jubilee rebels must go. That is what Azimio is insisting. Protecting political allies, opposition challenges MPs who have defied Uhuru to resign and seek fresh mandate. They also want registrar of parties to quit. This is what we have from the coalition leaders. They're saying, quote unquote, Kenya Kwanza must make no mistake. Azimio will do everything possible to protect its affiliate parties from these heinous attacks. We ask all Kenyans to join us in protecting multi-party democracy. On the front page of the Star, Ruto's strategy to push through tax laws is a splash. He has engaged technocrats to break down proposals, demystifying the grey areas. This is on page 4 and 5 of the Star this morning. And truly, it's such a sweaty affair, as you can see, with the Housing PS Charles Hinga and State House spokesperson Hussein Mohammed during the press conference at State House, Nairobi, yesterday. And Museveni is talking tough, threatening to expel armed Turkana herders, I should say, on page 6. Also over 7,800 cases. Kenya to benefit from global plan for more cholera vaccine and plunged to death. 5 detained after students fall, dies from 8th floor. And on bipartisan talks, Raila gives ultimatum and says the Ruto should resign. That is a story that you want to follow on page 7 of the Star this morning. Buckling down to business. Now, U.S. graft shocker in new trade deals with Ruto, corrupt public officials to be sacked. This is what it is saying here. Deal prevents hiding of ill-gotten wealth. That is what we have as the sub-headline there. And Kenya reveals 3-year, 469 billion shillings oil investment roadmap. You can read all about this in the Business Daily. Kenya will need at least 469 billion shillings for commercial oil production in Turkana well if it is to realize its petrodollar dream amid the exits of exploration firms. And you can read also the details of this in today's Standard, where they have an editorial regarding the Turkana oil, that the government should come clean as far as this Turkana oil deal is concerned. Tell Kenyans the whole truth about Turkana oil. The government has, over the last decade, inspired a lot of hope that Kenya will at some point join the League of Oil Exporters and with it add another foreign exchange earner to our economy. The discovery of oil in 2012 elicited excitement and much anticipation, other than people of Turkana who finally saw the resource as a means of getting meaningful investment in terms of improved security, roads, water, health, and other essential infrastructure. Emergence of oil sector will further lift the economy, further enabling the country's economy to be more diversified, as well as boosting foreign exchange revenues, which largely come from agricultural commodities. Now, the lofty dreams now appears to be falling apart. The biggest blow has been the withdrawal of 2 of the joint venture partners in the Project Oil. And we have in the Project Oil Kenya, that is Canadian Farm Africa Oil, and the French oil major, that is Total, who have quit the project, leaving Tullow as the only driver of the dream. Africa Oil stated that it is exiting Kenya to focus on production and high potential exploration opportunities, perhaps dissatisfied with the progress that Kenya project has made so far. And we shall be looking at this intensely with our panelists here in the course of the program, but also you have details of this in the Business Daily this morning. So the initial ownership is broken down for you here. Total and Africa Oil each had a 25% stake in the venture, 50% from Tullow. Total Energies 25% and Africa Oil 25%. So the other 50% is only owned by Tullow. We are yet to know who will actually take a scoop of that particular share as well. On the ticker, state loans to parastatus breached the 1 trillion shilling mark amid default spike. Is another story you want to follow. Ndegwa's overtake Kenyatta's in NCBA ownership. The Philip Ndego family has bought an additional 31.6 million shares of NCBA Group with a current market value of 1 billion shillings in transactions that has seen them overtake the Jomo Kenyatta family to become the bank's top shareholder. CBK leans on the 3-year bond to boost domestic borrowing. That is a story that you want to follow on page 13 of the Business Daily this morning. And we have the editorial cartoons as well. This is what Gado has drawn inside the Standard. And these are the court cases. Trump is back on Twitter after the resumption of his account. And this is what has been drawn also by Stano inside the People Daily. Words of cash that is being taken from the government coffers so far. All that for supplying air. And this is how Wanjiku has reacted, as you can see there, drawn by Stano. I shall be showing you what is on the front page of East African, also the Daily Monitor on the split screen, and also the China Daily as well, and other dailies, the latest from The Economist, the Newsweek, Forbes, and Fortunes, and that is Fortune, and other international magazines as well. But for now, I want just to hark back to the story of the housing levy, what we had from the PS, who spoke yesterday from State House. And we have the good, the bad, and the ugly, and what is the way forward as far as the housing levy is concerned. It seems the government is particularly intent to make sure this really is steamrolled through, sink and swim. No one is going to hear all this noise, all these noises as it were, coming from the private sector or the Federation of Kenya's Employers. Let's just listen into what they had to say yesterday from State House. This is the Principal Secretary, Ministry of Housing.
The 3% mandatory housing levy has proved a tough sell for the government, with Kenyans opposed to what they see as an added tax on their already stretched income. Although the government maintains that the levy is not a tax, it remains hard-pressed to justify it. Barely a week ago, the president sought to clarify just that.
Nothing stops you as somebody who is employed. Yeah? Number one, contributing to this fund. Because it is not a tax. It is your money. What you are doing, you are playing your patriotic duty. Because out there, we have millions of young people who get out of school every year. Why is it our responsibility? Because they are the taxpayers that end up paying our salaries, right? And it is our duty also to see how we can help them in a small way.
But despite the near-patriotic rallying call, the levy has remained a thorn in the government's flesh, forcing the government to continually engage on the issue. Come Wednesday, and the Housing Principal Secretary Charles Hinga, flanked by State House spokesperson Hussein Mohammed, held a briefing on the levy.
Housing and settlement.
The aim was to offer clarity on the levy, indicating that Kenyans would be allowed to withdraw their contribution after 7 years. But with that clarity came an admission that though Kenyans could view the levy as a saving vehicle, the contribution would not earn any interest.
210,000. So it's not millions that you'll have saved. It's 210. For average Kenyan who is going to be contributing 1,000 shillings and below, that is 84,000. But however, if you want to get it out, you will get out your portion. The employer portion stays in. Because the employer portion is the one that protects the capital of the fund. So that if now there are obligations for the fund, we are supposed to keep those that kind of money. But after 14 years, you can now exit.
This then begs the question as to why Kenyans should invest in a venture devoid of interest and lock in their hard-earned contribution for 7 to 14 years. The answer?
You get 100% return on day one. You ask me, Hinga na smoke kitu. You know, nyinyi hamuelewi hii maneno. The minute you put your money in the housing fund, the employer contributes for you another 1,000. So on day one, you're 1,000 in Azar to another 1,000.
The PS further notes that if the government is to achieve its housing goal, it is necessary to impose the levy in order to guarantee investors that they will recoup their money for any credit facility extended to Kenya towards the housing project.
I have got over 200 investors, and all they are saying is, if you give me an off-take plan because I don't believe in your story. Your story is a very emotional story about Wanjiko owning a home, about the Juakali artisan owning a home, a shoeshiner owning a home. But hey, my money is not emotional. All right? So me, I just want to know that I'll get paid.
With the government keen to achieve its affordable housing plan of 200,000 units and lower the cost of housing, the PS has also intimated that the tenant agreement bill, which sought to regulate the amount of money Kenyans pay in rent, could soon be reviewed.
There is a landlord and tenants bill that is before Parliament. It was sent back out. It addresses some of these issues about the regulation of tenants. So it is still a bill, and we hope, because now there is goodwill, it's one of the bills that we can be able to get completed.
Jimmy Mbogo, KTN News.
There you have it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we were listing for you that has been done on the front page of the Daily Nation. You've heard from the CS. We just want to buckle down with this latest development, especially for the employers and the contractors who they're saying, okay, as you've heard Patrick Obath and Professor Gituro Wanaini, your money, my money is not emotional. Yeah?
Interesting.
My money is not emotional.
You can take emotions elsewhere.
But what do you think about the contractors with some of these incentives that the government is actually doling out for the contractors so far?
I'm not sure. I think the Star summarizes very well in its cartoon on page 3.
Yes.
And there's a young fella there being pushed to this mixture. And the 3% there. And he says, I'm not boarding.
He's not boarding the 3%.
He's not boarding the 3%.
But it seems that there's no choice as far as boarding is concerned.
Right.
Everyone has to board.
And there is the rider there saying, I think this is right time for Madamano. There's a very interesting, it's actually in the...
Just continue. There's a very interesting
quote in the daily, business daily at the back. And it's important, the mathematician, physicist, astronomer, alchemist that, and also in theology, Isaac Newton said, tact is the art of making a point without hurting, without making an enemy. Now, if you look at
the art of making a point without making an enemy.
Yeah, tact is the art of making a point without making an enemy. And this is what we should be approaching the housing. On one side, and I hope when the Prime Minister of Singapore was here, the government had an opportunity really to understand or share what Singapore went through. And it was already using existing contribution within the Singapore. I'm looking at things like NSSF, and that they used that with respect to getting accommodation for everybody in Singapore. We do appreciate the numbers are not as here. What is not clear, and it's important, as Macharia Gaido pointed out on Wednesday, to listen. There's a lot of not listening. We are going this way to do. And it's not a question of that there's something we have on board and we are losing. Listen to that is important. Now, when I talk about that, there are people really getting that 3%. It's hard for them. It's hard. We say 1,000, as a PS Hinga is saying, there are people that's a tall order. And then the point of it being optional, in my perspective, should be taken into consideration.
Right. Just hold on to that point as I sort out to Mike. I think it's gone off radar a bit.
Oh,
and yes, I'll sort it out. So Patrick, yes.
I'm not boarding.
No, you are boarding. No. Patrick.
Yeah.
Yes. So your reaction on this latest development, especially for the incentives, and what you hear regarding also for the employers that, yes, if I pull out still your money, you don't have to pull it out. It remains there for the last 14 good years.
Yeah, yes. 14 good years. You know, I have a whole series of conflicting positions that I hold. I'm a member of the Federation of Kenya Employers. I've been working on a task force that's looking at housing, yeah, and urban engineering, and so forth and so on. So I'll just go back to what Prof was talking about. When you look at the evolution of housing in Singapore, how it started.
Right.
It started with what they call the Housing Development Board of Singapore. And it was funded by the government. It was one big program, which was focused. You don't have a lot of other things that were happening. It was this one funded program. And the way it worked, originally it was supposed to be for the very poor. But those guys, at the end of the day, can't afford a house, period. Much as you'd like to say you're going to put housing for your shoe shiner, your nanny, whatever it is, it will not work because they cannot afford to live in that kind of house. There is no way they can, unless their earnings skyrocket by maybe 3,000–4,000%. So if you're going to do affordable housing, so quote, you're going to target a certain market in the country. So when you put a program like that, you say, right, we are looking at people who are earning between this and that, right? And that is where you start. And when you target those people, what you do is you create a fund, and you don't need to go taxing a whole bunch of people. Currently in Kenya, you have a lot of money sitting in pension funds, in NSSF, in all these places, which effectively you can create an attractive bond mechanism that this money gets put into a fund. Now, once you got that fund, what you do is you get people to apply from within this bracket, because now they're going to get housing at a level that is lower than your commercial rate that goes out. And once you do that, people can apply now, and they're not going to apply for a house that has already been built, because if you're doing that, you're tying down capital for 2 or 3 years as you're building the houses, right? Because you got to spend that money. You tell these guys, you'll apply now, and you start paying pole, but you've got this guarantee that you got a house in 3 years' time. So you're not paying an exorbitant amount of money because you're living in some place at the moment.
Yes.
Right? You pay a small amount of money, which is you showing your interest, but you sign a contract. So this patient capital, which you already have, which is your NSSFs, your pension funds, actually causes you to build the houses. And after 3 years or 4 years of me having applied, and I'm paying a trickle amount up to that period, then the house is ready. Then I shift from where I've been staying to this place, right? And I now start paying as an owner-occupier, right, within that. And that patient capital is the one that pays for it, right? But putting in a housing levy to create a fund, I think is not the right way to go around it. Because you're creating a fund for everybody, right? You should be targeting people specifically when you're doing that funding.
To me, the idea is great.
The idea is great, but the mechanism is the problem that we have, right? And this funding, levies, whatever, and everything else, instead of looking at this money that is already available from all these pension funds, is the problem. A lot of the investments that are happening in this country, you know, if you talk about, you know, private equity that is putting money into buying, you know, all these, you know, in trading and buying bonds in the, you know, buying shares in the stock exchange. And these private equity people who are investing in, you know, in the country, in companies and land and whatever and everything else, most of that money is coming from pension funds abroad. The South African pension fund has got huge money. And they're actually investing in Kenya as a pension fund. The Canadians, right? The Americans, BlackRock, the guys who do a lot of pension investment, where do they get their money from? They just pick up pension money from all over the world, they syndicate it, and they invest. So I think we need to start thinking, instead of taxing people, we use this patient capital that is sitting there, and use that to create a mechanism that people will want to buy into. And we target a specific part of the population, not everybody, right? I mean, and if you start saying employers have to put money in, right? And if you look at your average worker, what are the things that you're removing from his salary? First of all, you've got the income tax that is sitting there. You have now a housing levy. You have NHIF. You have NSSF. And all these things, you know, and if you look at the other levies that people are paying indirectly, go to fuel, You got a whole series of levies that you're paying, the road development, water and everything else. All that is being paid by somebody who's earning a salary. At the end of the day, how much of that salary is going to be there for them to be able to even afford the house? Yeah? At the end of the day. So I think the idea is great.
You see the curve of priority changing
Yeah.
completely. And I think the point Patrick's making is, you feel great, Diba, to hear your son or daughter, they have somewhere to sleep. When we are growing up, my parents say, no, the first thing is not even a car. Somewhere you sleep.
Yes.
The idea is great. The way we're going about it, we didn't need to make some adjustment, as he pointed out. Very important that the private sector comes into play and is given the responsibility in terms of even construction.
Yes.
But the government ensures it comes back and does two things. Must protect in terms of the interest rates, how much you pay to get that house. Secondly, and this is what really managed Singapore managed, is a concept you get these houses and within a month I've already sold it. Because you get to these low income areas, what mostly you get the house and they sell. And what the Singapore they did, you must stay in that house for 7 years. But as Patrick is pointing out, the idea is good, but let's look back and see how the way going about it. I think it's a very hot potato. The PS was sweating. Maybe it's a very, very hard. He reminds me of Morogaro.
It's a sweaty affair, as they put it here.
And as a listening person is what Isaac Newton talked about. You can make your point without making an enemy. And that's what the voice, in my understanding of the Kenyans, are saying. It's a great idea, but say, look how we go about it.
But there's some very good sweeteners for the contractors, as it has been stipulated and broken down by the PS, and I think also the Daily Nation has actually done a good job in terms of breaking it down for us as well. That you first of all, the real estate
The only thing they have
developers-
not put it, they put the good, the bad, where is the ugly?
The ugly is what we're waiting for. If we may just look at it briefly, that the real estate developers to get free land, tax incentives on construction inputs and guaranteed market.
Now,
But
And
that
then we
free
have-
land,
yes.
tax incentives, that is all around reducing the cost of the house.
Exactly.
It's not an incentive to the contractor.
It is
All
not
you're
an
doing
incentive.
is you're reducing the initial cost of housing. So that's great. I mean, those are the kind of things that if you had this central fund and people are doing, that will reduce the cost of housing so it becomes affordable.
And
It's
it goes
not
to the
an
consumer
incentive.
of the house.
It goes to the consumer.
You must take it
Right?
down to the consumer of the house.
Yeah. And on construction
So
inputs
there's no
and
free land
forth.
here?
Yeah. No. It's reducing the cost to Patrick Obathanians to buy the house. That's all it is. Which is a great idea that government has got plenty of land and everything else. Put that to work by basically giving it for free and then getting, reducing the cost of housing, which is great. I mean, that I agree is not issues, right? And you're talking about giving the contractors. It's not the contractor, the real estate developers and all the rest of it, right? It is this, you should have this central agency that is doing the affordable housing. You shouldn't actually now all of a sudden open it out. Because the minute you do that, the shenanigans that happen in Kenya will happen. And those affordable housing will no longer be affordable. Or if they are, they're going to become those pack of cards that collapse. Because if you allow people to develop it, and you're saying this is going to be affordable, they will take shortcuts. You can be sure of that. And the trust element in terms of delivering that, at that kind of price of good quality, really has to be bolstered seriously. Yeah. In Singapore, when you looked at the way they developed people, the quality and everything else was guaranteed by the agency. And it was a single accountability point where they had that whole thing. But here you're saying you're going to open it up to real estate developers, to X, Y, and Z. That whole thing, given the reality in Kenya, is going to create a big problem. Yeah. So as I say, the idea is great, but we really have to be careful how we put together the whole package that is going to happen. Even the construction, when we talk about the construction, the contractors who are going to be there have got to be special contractors. Yeah? They've got to be almost built up like the Chinese. Yeah? Where those guys actually get funded, they get paid quickly, right? And they're able to turn around they're going to be able to turn around projects rapidly. Yeah. So that fund that is being set up, the development agency which will have the fund, has to really be set up to be efficient, to be able to pay and to control quality and ensure that they deliver. That element of trust has really got to be built up.
That agency Patrick is talking, it's well spelled in the Vision 2030. Even where it will get the funds. It's a question of copy and paste. And we are up and running. It's very clear. You talk to the technocrats in the Ministry of Lands or whatever, housing. And I had the opportunity to talk with them, even as we looked in the MTP4. Very clear. What will be done. So,
and you know, NSSF, at some point, they were, in fact, not NSF, but in my own company when I was, my pension fund when I was, working. So the things we were pushing for was to be allowed to use the pension fund as collateral for building a house. Yeah, a lot of the pension funds said, no, we are not in that business. Ours is pension only. But this is patient capital that can actually be used for that, right? So pension funds, NSSF, whatever it is, if I'm going to build a house, I should be able to pay for it over 30 years. Yeah, and when I retire, I have a house. But I'm living in it all the time I'm working. That's the model we should look at, not just giving guys houses. It's a fact that you're going to own that property in perpetuity.
Absolutely.
All right? And even if you look at some of these schemes that are working around the world, I get good, I get it cheap at the start, but those things, when I now want to sell it onto the market, right, I sell it at a premium.
All right. Let's hear from Bill Okero also on this. Bill, good to see you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us as well. So you
had to go fast and play for us, I appreciate that, Bill. We need those players like...
We need prayers.
A lot of them.
Yes.
The very good ideas I think my colleagues have put on the table, and many Kenyans have been putting on the table the last few weeks and months. The question we have in this country is always, does anyone listen? That's the challenge in our country. That you can see from the presentations being made on the tax laws by different institutions, different sectors of the economy, industries, private sector, everyone giving their views, and the government saying, sorry, we're not changing a comma. So the unfortunate thing is that you have a whole nation of people who have their views on how they should spend their money, how they should be governed. They have ideas, but their government is not listening. And this government, unfortunately, like the previous ones, is fast developing thick skin. They know it all. It's what they want, or the highway, nothing else. So I think no one disputes that there's a need for housing. No one disputes that there are some positive. There are many positive factors in the whole program. But I think you need to look at the other side also, the challenges. Looking at an economy that is in a bad state, where millions of Kenyans are jobless, millions more their incomes have dwindled because of inflation, globally and locally. We have, people's incomes have been declining and the cost of living has gone through the roof. And you're telling the same people, pay this and pay that and pay this. Every day new ones. In the course of this week alone, I'm hearing about compulsory you must register, for the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce. People we have not doubled. We have actually increased by astronomical figures the contributions for NHI, for NSSF, taxes. So many. I mean, you must pay for new ID, new number plates, new this, new that. And honestly, the government needs to see that where are the jobs? Where are the incomes? What about the cost of living? Can't you define this thing? Why must the government try to force everything by law? If this is such a beautiful idea, you don't need a law. You don't need it. If you have all these incentives, you're giving free land, free tax incentives. Investors will come from all over the world to build houses. Pension funds will go to build houses. We are holding trillions in funds. Why is it a requirement that government must be the one to do these things? And then what about the trust deficit in government in this country? Which fund have they run successfully, including their own normal government funds that they receive from the consolidated fund? They don't have that history of management of funds in a prudent and efficient manner. Now you're setting up. We have seen that in NSF, we have seen that in we have seen that in every government, including central government and county governments and everywhere. Now you are creating another fund. Why would anyone trust that this government would spend the 9 billion they want to collect annually by law, efficiently and prudently? And what happened to the houses that has been built by the way? We have a history when they started the low-cost housing in Kibera and in Majengo. Who got them? Did any of those people who are living in slums benefit?
No, not at all.
These ones which have been put up in the last 5 years in Ngara,
Yes.
go and do an audit. Who are the majority of the people who got? Most of them are senior civil servants, and so forth. You try applying. I have seen people who have tried to apply. Unless you talk to Mr. So-and-so, even with your percentages you're paying, it's not an easy thing for you to get those houses. So you need to know that there are challenges. But I think the whole concept of trying to tax Kenyans and say this is a good thing, I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think everybody needs houses, but the government can go through it other ways without necessarily, making things more difficult.
And so we have also the principal secretary, the cabinet secretary coming forward and saying, or coming to the fore, and saying we have no option as Kenyans. We have to pay these taxes. You're honing it actually and chucking it down the throats of Kenyans as well. How should Kenyans receive this? It seems we have no option at all.
When you have a civil servant or a member of parliament, people who have been employed by Kenyans, they're public servants. They need to understand the whole concept of taxing. Tax is there in the constitution. Tax should not be a burden on society. And it is up to the people whom you govern, whom you work for as public servants, to determine how much they want to pay as their taxes to develop their country and how much they want to retain as responsible in their own income so that they can spend it in their own way. It's not for the government to think for people on how to spend their money. I think that is the mistake that Kenya government, some of these public servants think about. It's not. People decide. This is why we have there people, we have representatives that you need to look at the needs of the people and then you look at the economic situation. Is this the time to tax people? And you keep saying the economy is in shambles. The economy is in crisis. The same government of us, they're saying things are going to be hard. Is that the time to tax people?
For the next 3 years, things are going to be hard.
And you want to tax?
And you want to tax them?
Babu Nabwana, he made a very interesting, I don't know whether you've seen it on social media. It's a very interesting clip for about 5 minutes. And he says, this is not politics. He talks about economics, neoclassical, Keynesian, all that. And he step back and the technocrats in government, we have to understand this. And I like the point he is raising and what the one you are raising. If somebody is saying they're not going to change a comma, what are you telling people who can think? What are you telling people who have alternatives?
They don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, it's not about changing a comma. And I go back again. Tact is the art of making a point without making an enemy.
Yeah.
They can make the point without making enemies here. Nobody is against all that. It's we're trying to do for the better of this country. And when one Babu came out with those 3 points, you really don't create wealth by taxing people. You create wealth by people spending. Yesterday we were talking to my wife and she says, I'm not going to buy this, I'm not going to buy this. Sugar, I don't know how it is. Yeah? So what do? You pull back and you're not spending. And it's something we need to look at as a nation, really.
You see,
the same narrative we are talking about. When you don't pay the public service or delay their payments, they are really not spending. Yeah? Somebody has a room somewhere. Somebody is taking somebody for lunch at Kamaki's. We spend. Somebody benefits for Chomari, Nyama. So there's a whole movement of resources within the country.
So what actually is the underlying issue here? Is it that the government is really down deep in their hearts, they have the best interest of Kenyans as far as housing is concerned, or the government does not have money and you're seeking now some coffers so that in the next 14 years at least you have a flash of funds that you can actually use to steamroll your operations?
Dibal, we have a bloated executive, quote, the management of Kenya. is bloated seriously. And they are increasing the cost of managing a country that is not giving any return, right? And the return is being seen as this tax. I mean, I'm not an economist, but that is just, this tax because you need to fund this management. In a lot of organizations, and a government is not different. If you're going to start creating wealth, as Prof has said, you've got to focus on different sectors with a different objective. If you want to increase wealth in this country, you've got to focus on low-hanging fruits that can give you very quick returns and not try and do everything at the same time. So, if you're going to get quick returns at that lower level, for example, an example for me would be to just say, fine, let us focus on increasing the agricultural output of this country.
Yep.
Yeah? And that is something that crops take how long? Right? Crops take a year, 2 years, whatever it is. By the time you put the investment, those things will take a very short time to give you a return in terms of creating money that people can begin to spend. So if you focus on agriculture for the next 1-2 years, right, and put all the a large amount of resources in that area and do it properly and manage it properly, you will get that sector beginning to run and people getting used to producing. And when they do that, they have spendable income coming in.
The point is disposable income.
Yeah. And that is your low-hanging fruit that you can do very quickly. Investments in housing, in infrastructure and everything else will take time. But if you've got a basic economy that is working, then you can put infrastructure on top, right? Because that's long-term. But the simple day-to-day production, agriculture is the quickest one for us. Then the next thing is then value addition on top of that because you got raw material. The other value addition is on natural resources that we have. And you've really got to make that a very good incentive for people to work, to be able to invest in that area. And if you do that in the short term, eventually you begin to build, you begin to get the economy really growing. Then you can now start talking about these social benefits that people should be achieving. So you start talking about housing, you start talking about, all these things that you want. Because people will now be able to pay tax. Yeah? And the tax will come in, and the government then has options on how they're going to spend that tax. Not to put a levy forcing people in one direction. In my personal view, a successful government is the one where people have got their basic needs, they pay your tax, and then you have options for investment in that tax. But not to say we're going to tax people to create an investment.
I think your question is a good question. Why would governments, in all this, why would they do these things?
Yeah.
Sometimes government is not in touch with reality. That's the challenge. Quite often that is the reason. And I've seen the government argue that, look, this was in our manifesto. Housing is something I went and discussed with Kenyans. It was in our manifesto, so I must do it. But how many other things were in the manifesto that have been dumped on the roadside? It was in the manifesto that we will not borrow a shilling. We are borrowing by hundreds of billions. It was in the manifesto that there will be no new taxes. Read my lips, it is collecting taxes left, right, and center, raising taxes every day. There are so many things which are there. But I think the issue is, has the government successfully done any of the things that they have started in the last few weeks, months? For example, on this issue that is just being raised on, there are a number of things that they have decided to do. One was agriculture. They said, we'll deal with food security.
Yes.
We are going to deal with it. And they came up with the fertilizer story and KNTC. 7 months down the road, nothing has come out of that thing. KNTC has become a whole sham where people are just making money. The sugar was duty-free sugar, duty-free rice, duty-free maize and fertilizers and things of there. Where are they? The corruption, the lack of integrity in these institutions. So you are now adding housing. Why would anybody trust the government that this housing, when they'll do it more efficiently? So I think the government should really sit with people. That is my concern. They should sit with farmers. You tell me one meeting where government seriously addressed the issue of agriculture, the issue of food crisis, by sitting with all the farmers in this country to find out what are the challenges. Why are we unable to grow maize, more competitively, and we are thinking of growing it in Zambia? Is that a solution? You tell your farmers, I want to go and grow in maybe another country. Why don't you sit with your manufacturers to discuss the issue of value addition, the issue of production in this country? Why are you unable to sit with your own? You want to travel 24 hours in the air. All our people, leaders are flying, looking for investors. Why don't you talk to this investor in agriculture, talk to this investor in production, in manufacturing, talk to this investor in the service sector, find out how we can enhance productivity internally. Look, Magufuli spent 5 years in his country without going anywhere because he said this is where the investment is. This is where the resources are.
Excellent.
The resources
Excellent.
are the people.
Yeah, within the country.
It's your people. If you don't have confidence in your people, why would anybody come to your country when the local ones who are here with their own investments are already complaining? They're complaining about the taxes, they're complaining about the levies, they're complaining about lack of integrity in institutions and service delivery. Why would anyone else come into this country and make an investment? Kenya's Asian manufacturers presented yesterday, I watched last night, and KEPSA. They said investors are leaving this country in large numbers because of the unfair playing field in terms of the taxes, in terms of the high cost of energy and lack of competitiveness and so forth and so forth. Nobody's listening. Those members of parliament are the ones who have said we are not changing a comma. They've been taken through like students in a class. That's what one of the media class papers say. It was like a classroom. They were taken through and told, I want this thing in this manner, and they said, we'll deliver it. So if you can't listen to investors and manufacturers and businessmen in this country, why would you expect any investor to come from outside? So for me, I think this government has
at that point,
Professor, allow me just to take a short break. Then we circle back with you on that issue. But maybe we could also hark back a bit to Kibra and the project on the slum upgrade. What was the motive that the government had then that made this particular project also stall along the way? Was it lack of funds, or was it also the corruption that the clammy hands of corruption came into that particular project? Should we learn from the Kibra project that really failed?
Absolutely.
Before now we piggyback from that particular learning and move forward with this particular housing project